In this video, I want to take a look at a couple of simple methods for creating in-betweens. Here we've got this little pitch action, which we've seen before and pointed out in these videos. At this point, just converted into some very basic linear frames there, rather than the stepped version that we've seen previously. However, at the minute, there's no tweening on it, and we're not going to go through and tween the whole thing, but we're just going to use a couple of little areas as an example. A good example is the action here that's taking place on the root item. We see, of course, that as he comes out of the wind there, he comes through very fast into the pitch, but then he's running a bit more slowly into this point. Now, the timing is reasonably okay. I mean, he's not taking too long to get there, but it's just this very straight, flat, basic path that he's taking there between frames 12 and 17, which is a little too boring, quite frankly. It needs a little more punch and life to it. What we need to work on, basically, is the spacing, and to do that, we want to handle the in-between. So one method for this is going to be to turn to our graph editor here, and we could perhaps in-between this purely by using splines. So let's just, throw everything there over to TCB spline, and perhaps we'll put a bit of ease in onto this side there just by tightening that up. And we can also potentially put a bit of the backswing there that we saw in the curves video. So as this action has more rapid change earlier on, with it smoothing out more just toward the end there. We can see the effect that this gives, of course. We get a fast out to a much slower in there. And we do start to get a sense of him sort of catching his weight a bit more on that foot and stopping himself. We can refine it a bit more by doing similar adjustments here on the Z-axis and see what kind of result that gives us. Now, it's not bad, it's better, it's got a bit more life and action to it, but it still looks a little bit wrong there. Something about the way it's slowing out is just, quite frankly, too slow. There's too much ease out on this. We could perhaps have a crack with something like a Bezier spline. By doing this, I could perhaps use this Bezier handle here to really bring him up to position faster, and use this one here to tweak out how swiftly he arrives at that point. So it's almost as if I'm having him hit this key somewhat earlier by tweaking off there my Bezier. Of course, what I need to do is take care of the other side so I'm not getting that bad counter dip as a consequence of my adjustments. Also make a little adjustment there on the Z. And let's see what that does for us. Okay, that's a bit punchier, a bit snappier, all very nice. We can maybe work that out, maybe bringing the timing back a little bit would help. Sharpen that up, make it a little bit faster. Tweening is very much about getting your spacing down, but of course the timing and spacing do play into one another, so you will often find that when you are tweening, you do wind up adjusting timing around points of things as well. So you can see little adjustments that we make like this. So that's all fine, that's using curves, and of course we've seen how we can use curves to manipulate our in-between poses for things. However, what we can also do is to force things by creating new in-between keys. Of course, you can just pick whatever happens to be an appropriate frame, grab your items in question and manipulate them directly. Obviously, you see here that from this view, I'm only working, of course, the two channels, the Y and the X there. Come round in perspective view or some other view to also work the Z. But here's another nice way to be able to get your in-between keys if you are going to set keyframes, and that's to pick a point in the existing in-between, the existing interpolation, where you want things to arrive to, but at a different time. All you simply have to do is just create a key, which you can then just drag backwards to an earlier point in time like this. In that way, manually offsetting the pose in time and creating a forced in-between like this here. And we see that that starts to look, pretty decent there. The advantage of doing it this way, of starting to build up in-between actions with keyframes rather than having to do everything through curve tweaking, is of course the fact that you can do it on multiple items. So let's say I took the shoulder, the elbow and the wrist there, and what I wanted to do was to tween this whole action where they're coming across into the throw like that, I could perhaps just key them all here at 12 and then shift that key. Or alternatively, of course, know where I want to shift it to, go to create the key for this current existing pose, but enter it at the keyframe I want it to go to, which would be 11. And consequently, I can create in-betweens for whole sets of items, even whole rigs if need be, nicely and easily, and also, of course, whilst making sure to keep straight lines of keys between items, which will further aid me if I do need to retime and tweak the exact arrival points of keys either side of that in-between. There you go, simple little techniques for working between your existing key poses for creating the necessary detail in your transitions, either by just jumping into graph and making use of curves, or perhaps more easily in many situations, by using the existing motion that is already there, creating keys and pushing those in time to force fast in, slow out, slow in, fast out, or whatever other actions to help shape the motion across the in-between and during the transition as is desired. Let me make mention of something else that's pertinent to creating in-betweens. You need to keep your eyes sometimes on exactly which channel you are creating the in-between on. Very often you'll create your in-betweens as you go and you start to flesh out your animation. However, depending on your own individual workflow and the process you adopt, you might of course be tweening up animation in a different workflow practice and pattern to that which, I'm using here. Or on occasion you might find that after you've done most of your animation and you're taking stuff through splining and polish, you start to find little areas where you do want in-betweens created, in addition to what you might have already laid in. So let's consider just a very simple example here, right? So I've got this animation and it's been polished and put into curves and all of that. It's lovely. Now let's say I want an in-between here where I want the camera to be slightly higher up. Let's just open the graph editor so as we can witness what's going on. We've got, of course, Y and Z channel animation happening here. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab my Y handle and push him up a bit. Well, you see, of course, that what that's done is it's also inserted a key here on the Z channel. That means that I need to now go back and perhaps, tweak the TCB or whatever other handles I might have placed on this curve along here. Because, of course, having this key on the Z has interrupted the motion that previously existed on the Z channel. Now I could just come along and, just get that key and delete it away and, my Z channel returns to what it was. But who knows, maybe I've got other motions on X and heading, pitch, bank, whatever else. Given this little fact and this, possibility of interrupting other channels that you may not need to be tweening, always most useful to go in for a channel specific tween. I might do this in Graph Editor by just selecting, of course, the particular channel that I'm working on and just, of course, creating an individual key there. However, perhaps the easier and more commonplace way of doing it will, of course, be to set your auto key to modified only. That way you can grab just your Y handle here, make your adjustment, and there is no fall through, of course, into your other channels.